Hello, and welcome to Booked on Shalom World TV, where we introduce Christian books. I'm your host, Clare Hinshaw. Today we're speaking with Danielle Bean, author of Whisper, Finding God in the Everyday. Danielle is the former publisher and editor-in-chief of Catholic Digest and the creator and host of The Gist, a weekly Catholic women's television talk show in its 7th season on Catholic TV. Danielle has authored several books for women, including Small Steps for Catholic Moms, Momnipotent, and You're Worth It. She is the creator and host of the Popular Girlfriends podcast and a popular speaker on a variety of subjects related to Catholic family life, parenting, marriage, and the spirituality of motherhood. Danielle, welcome to Booked. We're delighted to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Claire. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Yeah, well, I'd love to start off just talking about the title of your book. So the theme of the book, as it says in the subtitle, is finding God in the everyday, but you chose the word whisper as your title to kind of encapsulate this idea. And I'm really curious why you thought that was the perfect way to express this idea of finding God in our everyday lives.
Yeah, well, I love the word whisper because it's really kind of evokes this sense of intimacy, maybe, where, God is whispering to you. It also kind of reminds you that, if someone's whispering to you, you're going to try to silence everything else, right? Try to turn off the television, maybe, so you can hear what they're saying, maybe, go to a quieter place and really focus on what they're saying so you can hear what they're whispering to you. So I like the idea of thinking about God whispering to us because that's what we need to do. We need to be tuning out the distractions. We need to be kind of leaning in for that closer relationship, connecting with him, and truly focusing on what he wants to tell us. And, as I was writing this book, I was discovering more and more all the different ways that God is looking to connect with us in every day. But they're not necessarily moments that are going to shout from the rooftops or speak to us from a cloud in the sky or a booming voice. It's really, in the first book of Kings, we read about God calling Elijah with that still small voice, a quiet whisper. And that is very much how he calls most of us today.
Oh, I love that. And, the way that you approach your subject throughout the book, you kind of focus in each chapter on a different means of encountering God in our everyday lives. I'd love to know how you focused in on these specific experiences as the primary ways to encounter God in our busyness, in everything that we have going on in the everyday.
Yeah, I really tried to kind of narrow it down in simple terms because I think when we think about connecting with God, sometimes we make it more complicated than it needs to be. We're like, where is God? Well, he's not speaking to me. I'm not hearing him. But we have so many things that are distracting us in the world today. We've got our cell phones, we've got television, we've got the radio on in the car, we've got news blaring in the corner of the kitchen. There's always something like that to pull us away, to distract us. But I found as I was paying more and more attention to the different ways that God communicates with us, it often was in very simple ways, in the joys of our life, in some of the pains, the struggles, and the grief of our lives, in small sacrifices we might make, just in our everyday relationships with the people that God places in our lives. So we do make it more complicated than it needs to be. And sometimes, I'm as bad as anybody, wanting it to maybe be super clear to me. I sometimes would look at the lives of the saints and these great mystics, and Jesus appeared to them like at the foot of their bed, telling them what his will was for them. Well, I thought, that would be nice. I would like that kind of clarity. And yet I realized that for most of us, that's not the way that God is going to be speaking to us. And it really is for our own good that he invites us into this deeper relationship with him by whispering, by speaking in these small ways, by encouraging us. It's never demanding. It's always inviting and encouraging. So he's waiting for us to tune the other things out and to really focus on him.
I love that the first thing you mentioned there is you were listing all these different places we can see him, that you said the joys. I feel like it's so easy to turn to God in the sufferings and the pains, and we forget about him when we're having joy. So I love that you started off with that.
Yeah, it's easy to forget, right? When things are going well, and it's human, but sometimes we only think of God when we realize that we need him, or when life is going pretty smoothly, or things are going pretty much the way we want them to. We don't often enough, I think, turn to God. But I always remember the simplicity of my relationship with my kids when they were very small, when they were toddlers and just learning to explore the world, that they had this natural inclination to be turning to me, not only when they needed me, but in a special joy when they enjoyed something especially. It was such a sweet connection that I remember having with them, where they would turn to me in all of their joys and all of their sorrows. And I think that that's exactly what God wants with every one of us. He's our loving Father, and we are his children, and he wants us to be turning to him in all of the joys and all of the sorrows of everyday life.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And it strikes me that we haven't used the word yet, but we're really talking about here is prayer. And
Mhm.
you talk a lot about your own prayer life throughout the book. Do you have any tips or suggestions for people who are looking to either begin or deepen their own prayer lives?
Yeah, I always tell people, just do it. Because sometimes we make the perfect the enemy of the good when we're thinking about our spiritual lives, because we have these lofty goals, and that's good, right? It's good to have lofty goals in your spiritual life. But I really made the most progress and have continued to make the most progress in my spiritual life when I let go of it and don't consider it something that I'm going to accomplish or achieve. I think many of us, and especially people who might be more of a type A personality, you think, oh, I'm gonna master this holiness thing. I'm gonna get this done, and I'm gonna accomplish this, and I'm gonna, show up for all these different kinds of prayer, and I'm gonna grow closer to God. And we think of it as something we're going to accomplish, but there's so much to be learned when you recognize that God isn't calling on us to do anything, and we're never gonna wow him with our eloquence and our fancy prayers and all the words we might say. What he wants is a connection with us. He wants us to show up. He wants us to be. He values our being over doing. And that really is part of what I explored in the book, is this countercultural notion that maybe we don't need to find God. Maybe we don't need to seek God. Maybe we need to sit still and allow ourselves to be found.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I remember that was something that struck me in the book when you talked about that being versus doing. As someone who always feels like she needs to be doing something, it's kind of nice to be reassured that sometimes you can just be.
Exactly. God values you for who you are.
Yes. So, something that I thought was really lovely with the book was that at the end of each chapter, you end it with a prayer. And I think they were all prayers that you composed yourself. I would love to
Mhm.
hear a little bit about why you thought you should end the chapters that way and how you went about composing the prayers.
Well, like you said, this whole book is about prayer, right? Even if it isn't explicitly talking about prayer, it's talking about our connection and our relationship with God and the ways that He's calling us closer to Him. So, that, of course, is prayer. It means prayer. And so, I thought it was appropriate to end each chapter with a prayer that I composed on my own, because I was sharing a lot of my own personal stories in the book, in the efforts not of just, trying to teach everybody how to do it, because I shared some very humbling stories as well in the book, and things that maybe were a little bit less than perfect. And sharing some of those struggles, I think what I was trying to do in sharing those stories was really to encourage people to look at their own stories. And so when I shared, prayers in my own words from my own heart at the end of the book, I hope that they'll encourage people to do the same, to make your experiences of joys and challenges and sorrows, and your relationships with other people, and your relationship with your work, everything, every little part of your day, to make that a springboard toward prayer. So, embracing your own relationship with God, your own words, and your own story.
That's so interesting. I'm having flashbacks to when I was in first and second grade in Catholic school and they had us writing our own prayers. And I'm thinking, I haven't really done that since.
It's time to do
It's
it.
probably, yeah, it's probably a good practice. Now, you also include at the end of the book a beautiful little section of everyday prayers. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, I wonder what makes a prayer an everyday prayer.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that I like that kind of concept of everyday. The working title for this book was Everyday Mystic. And really what I was trying to convey with that idea, and I still love that concept of everyday mystic, was that we sometimes think like our experiences of God need to be extraordinary, or our experiences of God need to, be separate somehow from the mundane things of our everyday lives. And we kind of wait for those, glorious moments where the heavens open up and we feel truly connected with God. And yet God wants to be part of that mundane, everyday routine. And so the prayers that I included at the end of the book, like some of them are really kind of fun prayers where they're from saints and for particular times of life, maybe like when you're praying for a sense of humor or you're praying through a time of frustration. Or so I like that the saints kind of bring their own personal connection to these prayers. But I want people to embrace the idea that our prayer lives are meant to be every day. They're meant to be routine. They're meant to be part of how we're living our lives and relating to the world around us and connecting with God through all the ins and outs and the ordinary parts of our everyday lives. Instead of waiting for the extraordinary, I want people to recognize the extraordinary gift of ordinary life.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And as you're saying, the extraordinary gift of ordinary life, I'm thinking to the Mass and the green vestments and the ordinary time. And that's where we spend most of our lives. And we should be able to find God there.
Absolutely. He's waiting for us there. And that's what I found more and more, that as busy as my life has gotten and as busy as it's been raising a family and all the different things, all the different ways I've been pulled, with work and other kinds of obligations, that God is always there waiting. He's always inviting us closer in. He's always whispering. And it's on us to lean in, to tune in, and to pay attention.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'd like to kind of finish out here just with the idea of what you hope your readers will get out of this book. How do you hope that it can impact their lives?
Well, my number one hope is that people reading the book will be encouraged to listen for God's whispering in their own lives. Like I said, I shared these stories not because I have it all figured out. This book isn't about me teaching anybody anything truly. It's really about me sharing my story and my own struggles, my triumphs and my challenges in growing in relationship with God, and some of my real frustrations that I've experienced in that way. Some of the ways that I've been tempted to envy other people's spiritual experiences and at the danger of neglecting my own. And I think really what I want people to understand when they read Whisper is that God calls each of us uniquely with a personal call. So don't get distracted looking at other people's calls to holiness, their vocations. I mean, the wonderful things people are doing in the church and probably in your own workplace or community or at your kids' school or in your church. There's wonderful things that people are doing, but I really want to encourage people to listen to how God is whispering to you personally and uniquely, because that call is going to look different for every one of us. We all have unique circumstances. We all have unique gifts and talents and unique opportunities, unique marriages and children and work opportunities. So God is calling you in a unique way in your life. And again, he's not going to shout it from the rooftops. He's truly whispering it to you. So I want to encourage people to slow down enough. Make that space for God in your life. Make that space for quiet in your life and open yourself up to hear the ways that God is whispering his call to you. I used to strap one baby to my body while holding another in my arms, while another tugged on my sleeve, and two more fought over whose turn it was to choose the next storybook. I used to take 68 calls a day, chasing deadlines and running on adrenaline. I talked fast, overpromised, and rolled my eyes at questions from people who, for whatever reason, couldn't keep up. I used to fly through grocery aisles, filling my cart with basics and then hurrying to swipe my card so that I could get home and throw some of that stuff into a pot before dinner time. I used to rush to church, kneel in a pew, and then sit back in wonder as my mind zipped from here to there and then back again, never pausing for a breath, because I never did either. And maybe that's why it feels so good to do what I do now, which is to pause sometimes and breathe. I still do lots of things, maybe even too many things, but I do less. I do less with more intention and deliberation, more care and attention. I do less, but look more people in the eyes. I do less, but I think more things through. I type out thoughtful answers to emails that I would have deleted years ago because there simply wasn't enough time. I don't roll my eyes so much, and my jaw almost never aches at the end of the day because I've been unthinkingly clenching it for several hours. I know God was with me back when I was going so fast and striving so hard, but I can't help but think that He was waiting for me too, waiting for me to slow down and settle in, waiting for me to look Him in the eyes, waiting for me to stop striving and start diving more deeply, waiting for the me I am now. And now that I can see how some of this works, now that I can see a little bit of where this is going, I squint into the future sometimes. I want to see the me that I will be then. When I catch a glimpse of her, I smile because I know God, ever patient and outside of time, is waiting for her too. I think I first learned that language had power when I won the 7th grade science fair because I didn't have a great science fair project. It wasn't these great volcanoes and other things people were constructing. It was about the life cycle of gypsy moth caterpillars. And yet I really knew my stuff. And so when the judges were coming around to people's different science fair entries, they quizzed me about the life cycle of gypsy moth caterpillars, and I knew it all. And I talked and talked and talked. And I was astonished, and my parents were astonished too because they knew I hadn't put that much effort into the actual project, just the research. And I came away from that, and when I won that, thinking, "Wow, I really did something by speaking, by sharing my ideas with people verbally," and I really found that was a powerful thing. Well, that varies by the book, but with Whisper, I think that most of my research was my own life, right? So just observing my own life. Of course, I would research by reading scripture passages and reading people's interpretations or reflections on them. So that is sort of an informal way of researching. With some of my other books, though, where that are really Bible studies, looking at the stories of women in the Bible, then that really required quite a bit more research, and I did a lot of interviewing and digging deep into some biblical scholars and learning a lot myself along the way. One of my favorite Catholic books is it's called Searching for and Maintaining Peace by Father Jacques Philippe. I'm such a fan of his. It's just this tiny little book. It's actually a little booklet, and it'll fit in your purse or your bag. And I always have several around because I like to give them around to people because this book is life changing because it just speaks right to your soul. It really speaks in simple language about what we all want to do, which is find peace. And it's been very eye opening for me to recognize that ultimately, whatever it is you're praying about, whether you're worried about finances or your work or your kids or your marriage, what you want is peace. And so learning how to find peace and how to maintain it, which of course is through our nonstop connection with God, it really was an eye-opening book for me and one that I go back to regularly. I think reading a story is special because someone else is sharing their perspective with you. We all have our own kind of narrative as we're going through life, and we have our own perspective on things. And I think when someone shares a story, they're kind of inviting you into that. Some of the things are going to be very different from your own experience, but what makes stories really powerful are the things that we find out we have in common. Maybe with people who live lives very different from our own in different circumstances and different times or different parts of the world, there are things that we all hold in common, and we're all children of God. So recognizing some of those ways that we all share these basic things in common is really what makes stories powerful. One of the most surprising things I learned in creating my books was that other people would relate to them. I'm still amazed every time someone comes up to me and tells me that something I wrote or something that I shared in a book has touched their lives or changed their relationship with God or opened them up to a new kind of way of relating with God. That's such a gift and such a blessing. I do not take that for granted. And every time I write a book, I just pray for it to be a tool, a resource for other people, that God can speak to other people in their hearts through what I'm going to share on the page. And in the end, I don't feel like I can take credit for much of it. God is working through those words.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I love that. And thank you, Danielle, so much for everything that you shared in the book. As you said, you shared a lot of stories, some humbling. Thank you for that vulnerability and for everything that you shared with us today. It's really wonderful to hear from you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share here on Book, Claire. I've really enjoyed it.
Danielle Bean is such a gifted and natural storyteller. What I loved about Whisper is that she took me through all the emotions. I laughed, I cried, I felt validated. I learned things that I sometimes forget. I forget that God is in my everyday. I'm not going to find him in the big moments of the day that I keep looking for. I'm going to find him in the kitchen when I'm making dinner, and I'm going to find him in the car on my 100th errand when I'm bringing the children someplace. I love that Danielle is a mom, and she gets that my life is busy, and I can lose track of where I left Jesus. She brings me back each time with story and with her own beautiful insights, her own faith journey, which she takes you on with her, where we find Jesus in the simple moments of our everyday life. She also reminded us that we can do nothing apart from God, and it is his grace, his grace which we need, like we need air and water and sun, and without his grace we can do nothing. And that's a good thing, because sometimes we try to do too much. She reminded me of the uniqueness of my Catholic faith, that I can find and encounter Jesus in the sacraments. I find him in the most precious sacrament of the altar in the Eucharist, and I find him in the sacrament of healing in confession. I can find him when I'm angry, and I can find him when I'm challenged, and in my joy. He is our joy, as Danielle reminds us in her book, Whisper. And I know that I can find him in prayer, but sometimes I forget to pray and I forget where to start, or maybe I struggle. I guess that's a better word. I struggle sometimes where to start in my prayer, especially if I'm going through a particularly difficult time. And I'm happy that she's put in her book, at the back of the book, everyday prayers that I can turn to in those moments where I really need to connect with God, and I'm having trouble doing so. And we also know that that God's whisper comes through to us through the scriptures. When I'm trying to say, oh, I never hear God's voice in my life, and I'm looking for it, I just merely need to turn to the Bible, to the scriptures. And Danielle has put those at the back of her book too, with everyday scripture section, where she has several scriptures for each chapter, where we can meditate and go deeper into the themes that she brings forward in this very special, very engaging and inspiring book, where we will find, and I know you will too, that God is present in the whispers and in every part of our everyday.
Thank you for joining us for Booked on Shalom World TV. Come back next week for another episode. Until then, happy reading.
Are you searching for answers? Discover your true identity. Stay tuned to Shalom World.